So the U.S. has now confronted China face-to-face over the suspected Chinese spy balloon shot down by the U.S. 2 weeks ago. And it happened Saturday on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference between U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Wang Yi, China's top diplomat. Afterward, Blinken tweeted, "I condemn the incursion of the PRC surveillance balloon and stressed it must never happen again." China claims the large balloon was in fact a civilian research project that crossed into U.S. airspace by accident. The U.S. allowed it to float through the country for several days before shooting it down off the coast of South Carolina. On Saturday, Wang was asked to comment on the downing of the balloon. Here's what he said.
We asked the United States to handle it calmly and professionally based on consultation with the Chinese side. Regrettably, the United States disregards these facts and use advanced fighter jets and downed a balloon with its missiles. This is, I would say, absurd and hysterical.
Absurd and hysterical. CNN's Nick Robertson is covering the conference for us in Munich, and CNN's Mark Stewart is standing by for us in Tokyo with more from there. Nick, to you first. The meeting between Blinken and Wang was contentious for sure, but did it clear the air in terms of serving to reestablish an important dialogue for both countries?
Well, I think the language that's been used subsequently by the State Department, not calling it a spy balloon, avoiding that kind of language that for the Chinese is inflammatory because, of course, they deny that it was a spy balloon. It was a meteorological balloon. That's what they've been saying. But I think that President Biden has taken a huge amount of domestic political heat over this, particularly because the balloon was allowed to fly across the United States before it was shot down. The administration has been very strong and very clear that it did this because it believed that to shoot the balloon down above the United States could potentially spray debris or cause debris to fall down and potentially injure people on the ground. So I think the language that we're hearing from Secretary of State Blinken, this very strong condemnation of China's balloon entering U.S. airspace, a violation of sovereignty, breaking international law, that's an indication of the tough response that is, if you will, politically demanded in the United States. Diplomatically as well, yes, but there is a political element to this. But I think some of the other language has also been very tough. A very tough warning for China about if it further supports Russia in its war in Ukraine. Concerns were raised here by the Vice President and by Secretary of State Antony Blinken with allies, telling their European partners that they're concerned that China has a disturbing trend line towards upping its support for Russia. That it appears that China can be sort of walking up to a line that it might cross whereby it will give military support to Russia. And Nick, that's a concern. And there were strong warnings in the meeting about that.
And Nick, we will get to that issue in a minute. I want to go to Mark, though, in Tokyo, just to talk about China's reaction to this. We know China is reasserting itself on the global stage now that it seems to have claims it's conquered COVID. But what could this mean for U.S.-China relations going forward?
Well, I mean, as you well know, Paula, we may never know the true scope of the COVID situation, the impact on people in China. And that's based off of what we have heard from the World Health Organization. It's based off of what we've heard from medical experts. We also know that China has had a lot of economic hardship because of COVID. I'm talking about supply chain issues, manufacturing, even the stress on local governments. Quite frankly, in order to have economic success, you need diplomatic success. And both the United States and China are invested in each other. Perhaps this declaration is saying, yes, China is open for business, but two, perhaps it is leaving some room for some more diplomatic political negotiations. At least that may be one way to interpret this, Paula.
Yeah, and it seemed that they had to at least come face to face on this issue before they could go on to others. I want to go back to something Nick was alluding to. I want you to hear now from Wang himself talking about Ukraine. Let's listen.
We need to think calmly, especially our friends in Europe. about what efforts should be made to stop the warfare. What framework should there be to bring lasting peace to Europe?
So, Nick, how was those kinds of comments received by both Europe and the United States, especially since, as you mentioned, the U.S. is now coming out with its theory that, look, we believe that China may attempt to materially support Russia in its conflict with Ukraine?
You know, I think they're being treated with skepticism. I think they're being treated with actions are going to speak louder than words. And following on from those comments that Wang Yi made there, he went on to say that legitimate security concerns must be addressed in this deal. And I think to European and US ears, that sounds like saying that Russia's pretext, President Putin's pretext for invading Ukraine, that he was concerned about NATO's expansion, although he's gone in and killed thousands upon thousands of Ukrainians and destroyed much of the infrastructure in the country, that this does not align with what the Europeans and the US understands were the real reasons for Putin's rationale to go into Ukraine. So when China says legitimate security concerns must be addressed, it will sound very much as if it's sort of taking Russia's corner on this. And this was part of the message that the White House and the State Department were spreading among allies here, that on the one hand, it may appear that China is speaking about peace moves and that it may be making these overtures about being a sort of a peace broker, but behind the scenes they are quietly increasing their support for Russia. Now, it has to be clearly said that there is no evidence that's being put forward that China is giving military aid to Russia. It would be a game changer. And I spoke yesterday with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and I asked her about this particular issue, and she said, look, this is something we're concerned about. It's an open issue on the table, she said, whether or not or what level of support China is giving to Russia. But it's certainly something that European nations are concerned about. And Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, spoke about it as well yesterday.
Yeah, everyone seemed to be quite candid. And given that, Mark, Wang is expected, in fact, to travel to Russia in the coming days. What's the expectation there, especially since China's made it clear it wants to strengthen its bond with Russia, at least economically and strategically in its own sphere?
Right, and I think just to pick up on also what Nick was saying, this idea that China is publicly saying it's for peace, but privately doing something else. I mean, a lot of those allegations are being made based off of U.S. intelligence. That's what the State Department is saying, and that it is sharing those intelligence findings with their counterparts in the EU. I think moving forward, China has been given a very firm warning, at least according to a State Department spokesperson, that if it does pursue these channels, there will be consequences, there will be ramifications. I mean, I think that's the big takeaway, at least from the State Department towards China, is saying, China, take notice, we're warning you now.